Welcome to special ed office hours. This meeting will be recorded. And I guess Dee Dee will get started. Do you want to press the recording or did you already start?
Good to go.
Okay. Today's agenda: extending the timeline for initial ETR, current IEP progress in the ETR, IEP responsibility for students with disabilities attending non-publics, push-in related group services with additional students, students with disability who withdraw and go either nowhere or homeschool and return, educational diagnosis of autism, and child find reevaluations for homeschooled students. Okay, Dee Dee, take it away.
Thanks, Helen. So our first question is whether or not it's possible to extend the timeline for an initial evaluation. And the short, simple answer to this is it really can only be done if a parent chooses to do so. So generally, this would be done at a parent's request. There could be some extenuating circumstances where, due to a child's health or something of that nature, or an emergency with the family and the child wasn't available, that the team needs to extend the time in order to gather more information or complete testing. And in that case, if the parent agrees, the team can do that. First, I want to just make it very clear that this should be an extremely rare occurrence. The expectation is that there is ample time provided within the law for evaluations to be completed, and particularly for those initial evaluations, we know how critical that is. So again, this should be something that should happen very, very rarely. And like I said, generally it's going to be at a parent's request. So that kind of leads to the second question, which when a parent does request or the team agrees with the parent that an extension is warranted, what is the new timeline for that? There is not a set timeline for an extension. So what we would recommend is that, first of all, that the district would try to still stay within the 120-day total timeline that you have from, the referral through implementing the IEP. So do your best to still stay within that 120-day timeline. If that's not possible, then our suggestion as a best practice would be not to extend beyond 30 days. Okay. The next question is about including current progress from the IEP, like from the progress report, in an ETR. And that's a pretty common practice to have, that information. It's relevant in the ETR, and where that should be listed on the planning form and also in a part 1. What we have noticed recently in the IDEA review that's been going on, and found out that some other districts were also making the same mistake, is that people were putting it under data from interventions. And I guess I can understand why there would be that confusion, because the services that we provide as part of the delivery of services for students with disability is indeed an intervention. But when we talk about an ETR, what's important to remember is data from interventions as it relates to the ETR is specifically talking about interventions that were provided above and beyond the IEP. Prior to an initial, you'd be looking at RTI data. That would be the data from interventions that you would be referring to. For the purpose of the ETR, data from interventions never is talking about just the instruction that the child is receiving. So you do not put it under data from interventions. So where we would suggest that you put it is under classroom-based evaluations and progress in the general curriculum, but put a bold heading that it is progress from the current IEP, and then go ahead and give that information. And the reason that I'm saying you should put it under classroom-based evaluations and progress in the general curriculum is all IEP goals. The whole purpose of that is to move the student towards progress in the general curriculum. So whether, even if a student is working from the extended standards, they're still part of the general curriculum. So it absolutely does fit there, as opposed to creating a whole other category on the planning form. It is appropriate to put it there because, like I said, all of the students' IEP goals are indeed actually working towards the general curriculum. So that's the appropriate placement, but you just want to make sure that you use a heading so it's very clear that you are sharing the student's progress from their current IEP.
Okay, thank you, Dee Dee. So who is responsible for the ETR IEP for students who attend non-public schools? This always gets a little confusing. The public school whose borders the non-public lies in is responsible for child find, so they must complete the ETR. So that is for child find, the ones that border the school district, the non-public. The district of residence must write the IEP and make the offer of fate to the family as though the student would be educated at their home district. Like I said, sometimes that's been confusing. If anybody has any questions on that, now we have gotten questions this year already. So if anybody wants to ask a question, please do. Otherwise, we'll move to question 5.
Helen, I'm going to just add one thing real quick that I didn't put on the slide, but because this is, like Helen said, this can be very confusing. If the student is already attending the non-public school, then it is the responsibility of the district where that non-public is located, as Helen mentioned. The only difference is if the student hasn't yet enrolled and you, as the district of residence where the child lives, are made aware that there needs to be an evaluation, there's a suspicion, even if you know they're going to go to the non-public, they're not there yet. So that means under child find, it still falls back to you as the district of residence because they're not enrolled in the non-public. So they, for all intents and purposes, are still either enrolled in your school or they're not being schooled yet. And remember that under child find, the obligation is to seek and identify students with disabilities, even if they are not attending school. So that's why there's that little bit of difference, that it matters if they're already attending the non-public or if they haven't yet gone there. So I just wanted to make sure that I made that clear.
Thanks, Dee Dee. Okay, when pushing in related services into a self-contained or resource class, when the IEP states small group of 5, but there are 12 students in the class, is it non-compliant? Well, yes, it would be if you're delivering services to all 12 at one time. It would not be compliant because it is in direct contrast to what you have outlined in the IEP, what you have listed in the service delivery. However, students can be divided into 2 groups, with one group at a time receiving direct services from the related service provider, OTPT, speech, and the other group is supported by other staff. The group size, minutes, frequency would need to be accurately documented in section 7. So in this example, you would write group up to 6 with the session time noted. So you'd still make sure you have the time noted, the frequency, and then also that you're in direct alignment with what it says on the IEP. I think most people get this. We have been working with some therapists, and sometimes they hear different things. This isn't one of them, I wouldn't think, but yeah, you do want to make sure that even if there's 12 kids in the room that the therapist would be working with at some point, they're not working with them in a small group if the IEP says small group of 5 and they're servicing all 12. And that would be more likely in a situation of speech, if speech pushes in and does a group session with 12 instead of 5. Does that make sense? I guess it does. Nobody's asking any questions. So Dee Dee, let's go to 6. How should the district handle it when a student with disability withdraws and is not enrolled anywhere or is homeschooled, but then returns later with expired records? Okay, basically you serve the student as best you can according to the last known services. And then while you proceed, with the evaluation. You can't pretend that the student isn't a student with a disability and wait and see, because you already have knowledge that the student was previously eligible, which is more than a suspicion. So if the student has a current ETR, the team would gather info from the parent and determine whether the ETR is still sufficient to meaningfully inform the IEP, or if additional info needs to be gathered via record, with some new testing or an entirely new evaluation is warranted. And I'm assuming too, this would be how long that student has been gone from the district. And I also want to just note here, because of indicator 1 and 2, if you have a student that withdrawals and it's not enrolled anywhere, kind of make sure you keep EMIS records all that, right? Because we don't want kids counted as dropouts. That's just a little extra I had to put in here, because I know with some of our dropout records, kids were actually somewhere, like another school, and somehow didn't get recorded in EMIS. And then you got dinged with a dropout. So, okay, that was just my 2 cents there. Okay, can school teams make an educational identification of autism without an outside medical diagnosis? Absolutely. It's one of the categories for students with disabilities, one of the identification categories. So yes, you certainly can. Dee Dee, did you have a slide that's supposed to come in there? Well, okay, I said it is under IDA, including autism. It's not, the educational eligibility is not dependent on a medical diagnosis any more than dependent upon any more than a medical diagnosis is dependent upon an educational eligibility. So if autism is a suspicion, teams should identify it as or one of the suspected categories on the planning form and assess accordingly. Any questions on that? Or do you have any comment on that?
I think that one's pretty cut and dry. Thank you, Helen. Okay,
yeah.
and we saved this one for last because this one is very nuanced and very confusing. And that's why we have a little caution symbol on here. So we have had this question multiple times in the last week already. So I'm sure this is probably popping up for multiple districts. But the question is a district responsible for the reevaluations for students with disabilities who are homeschooled? And again, this is a little bit confusing, and we know that. So we're going to tell you what we know as of today, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. But in Ohio, homeschooling might be considered private or chartered non-public school, depending on how the parent registers. So the LEA, where a non-public is located, is responsible for reevaluations. And we already talked about that in an earlier slide. So the same would be true for the district of residence where the child is homeschooled, because if it's being treated as a chartered or a non-public school, then yes, you would have to do the reevaluations as well. If they're not, though, then the argument can be made that the district of residence met its obligation under child fine by doing the initial identification, We know that parents relinquish their right to FAPE, and they sort of sever ties with the districts. We've had that conversation before, and are not entitled to services. So the argument can be made that once you've made the identification, you wouldn't have to reevaluate unless the parent requests it or re-enrolls in your district. However, the reason I have a little caution sign there is that we've heard two opposing views from OEC. We know that other people have said, well, we were told by OEC something that sounded contrary. So we're seeking clarification on this. So again, we're saying that as of today, this is what we know to be true. Obviously, if we get new information, you all know that Helen and I will update you immediately if there is a change to what you see here on the screen. So if anything is different than what we're saying today, we'll make sure that, we share that in office hours. We also will share it, through our internal monitoring update that teams come to. We're doing some IEP refresher training this year. So we'll make sure that we get that message out loud and clear to everyone, because again, we know that this one is very nuanced and can be confusing, and also can be frustrating for districts too. So that's why we just wanted to talk about that in a little bit more detail.
Dee Dee, we had someone trying to get in. Maureen just came down and Chrissy, so they may still try to get in, but they didn't. Chrissy was an alternate host or whatever to let her in. I don't know what it was with the link, so I'm just letting you know
Okay.
someone might be trying to get in.
Okay, thank you, Helen. So we're going to go ahead and pause to see if there are any additional questions for a topic that was not talked about already, or if you need some additional clarification for anything that we did already discuss, and then remind you that we'll have the recording up within a couple of days. Okay, well, I don't see anything in the chat. And no one is unmuting to ask a question. So this was kind of short and sweet. These are the things that have popped up. It's early in the school year. We know everybody's kind of just getting back into the swing of things. So these are the things that we wanted to highlight for you today. And we just want to say thank you for attending. Remind you that you can join us next month when our office hours will be on October 9th. And that will be an afternoon session at 1 p.m. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. And we just wanted to say thank you again. And we look forward to seeing everybody next month.
Yes, thank you. And now that Dee Dee has stopped the recording, happy Dee Dee?
Wait, Helen, I haven't stopped yet.
All right.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.